An 8-year-old girl crawled through a crack in an abandoned log house everyone said was cursed, and what she found buried beneath its stone floor would turn her into the richest child in Kentucky and save her dying grandmother from a fate worse than poverty. Before we dive into this story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The morning mist clung to the hills of Harlan County like a secret too heavy to carry alone. 8-year-old Maya Fletcher pressed her face against the cold window of the tiny cottage she shared with her grandmother, watching the world wake up in shades of gray and gold. Her breath fogged the glass, and she drew a small house in the condensation with her finger, then added a heart beside it. The kitchen behind her smelled like oatmeal stretched thin with water and cinnamon used to make it taste like something more than survival. Her grandmother, Ruth, stood at the stove, her back curved like a question mark, stirring the pot with hands that trembled more each day. She was only 62, but life had aged her the way poverty ages everyone who carries it long enough. She'd been a schoolteacher once, back when the coal mines still ran, and the town had a reason to stay open. She'd taught 3rd grade for 37 years, shaping minds and believing in futures. But when the mines closed and the school consolidated with the 3 towns over, her pension got cut in half, and her prescription costs doubled. Now she worked part-time at the library for $8 an hour and tried not to let Maya see her cry when the bills came. The medicine bottles on the counter told their own story. Ruth's heart medication, the one that kept her alive, cost $240 a month even with insurance. The arthritis pills were another $60. The blood pressure medication, $90 more. Every month was a calculation, a choice between pills and groceries, between staying alive and keeping the lights on. Last week, Ruth had started cutting her heart pills in half to make them last longer. Maya had seen her do it, watched her grandmother's shaking hands struggle with the pill cutter, watched her swallow half a dose with tap water and pretend everything was fine. Maya turned from the window, her dark curls tangled from sleep, her oversized nightgown hanging past her knees. It had belonged to her mother once, back before the accident, back when there were 3 of them instead of 2. She didn't remember much about her parents, just fragments, her mother's laugh, her father's strong hands lifting her toward the sky. They'd died when she was 3, a car crash on a mountain road during a winter storm. Ruth had taken her in without question, raised her on love and whatever was left after the bills were paid. "Nana," Maya said softly, padding across the cold linoleum floor in mismatched socks. "Can I have extra sugar today?" Ruth's shoulders stiffened, then relaxed. She turned with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Not today, sweetheart. We're saving the sugar for something special." Maya nodded because she understood the language of not enough, even at 8 years old. She climbed onto the wooden chair at their small table, its legs uneven, wobbling slightly beneath her weight. The cottage was small, just 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a bathroom with pipes that groaned like ghosts. The wallpaper in the kitchen was peeling in the corners, revealing layers beneath, patterns from different decades, different families who'd struggled in these same rooms. The refrigerator hummed louder on one side than the other, and sometimes it stopped working altogether until Ruth smacked it just right. But it was theirs, or at least it had been until the letter came last month. The one Ruth tried to hide beneath the stack of unopened envelopes. The one that said the property taxes were overdue, and if they didn't pay $3,000 by the end of November, they'd lose everything. Maya had found the letter one afternoon when she was looking for paper to draw on. She'd read it slowly, sounding out the big words, and something inside her small chest had clenched tight. She didn't tell Ruth she'd seen it. She just started being quieter, asking for less, and watching her grandmother more carefully. She'd stopped asking for new shoes, even though her toes were cramping in the ones she had. She'd stopped complaining when dinner was just rice and canned vegetables. She'd learned to turn off lights when she left a room, to wear sweaters instead of asking to turn up the heat, to make herself smaller so Ruth wouldn't have to worry so much. After breakfast, Ruth washed their 2 bowls in the sink, her movements slow and deliberate. Maya noticed her grandmother wince when she lifted the bowl, the arthritis in her hands flaring up again. Ruth had stopped wearing her wedding ring 6 months ago because her knuckles had swollen so badly it wouldn't come off, and she'd been terrified it would cut off her circulation. She'd cried that day, standing at this same sink, twisting the ring until her finger bled, until finally it slid free. She'd put it in a dish on the windowsill where she could still see it, still remember a time when her hands worked right, and her husband was alive, and the world hadn't yet shown her how cruel it could be. Maya pulled on her worn sneakers and her too thin jacket. Ruth was getting ready for her shift at the library, pinning back her silver hair, dabbing on lipstick she'd had for 5 years. The library only needed her 3 days a week now, and even those hours were threatened. The town council had voted last month to cut funding again. "You stay close to the house today," Ruth said, the same warning she gave every morning. "And stay away from that old log house up the hill. You hear me?" Maya nodded, but her eyes drifted toward the window, toward the tree line where the ancient structure sat hidden among the oaks and pines. The log house had been there since 1863, built by a man named Samuel, who'd come to Kentucky during the Civil War and never left. It had been abandoned for as long as anyone could remember, its windows dark and empty, its front porch sagging like a sigh. The townspeople said it was cursed, that Samuel had been a strange man who hoarded things and trusted no one. They said he'd died alone in that house in 1978, and his ghost still walked the rooms at night. They said people who went inside came out changed, or didn't come out at all. Mrs. Henderson at the general store swore her nephew had gone in on a dare when he was 16 and came out 3 hours later with no memory of what he'd seen, just terror in his eyes and a reluctance to ever speak of it again. But Maya wasn't scared of ghosts. She was curious about them. Ruth kissed the top of Maya's head, grabbed her purse, and headed out the door. The old station wagon coughed to life, sputtered, then rumbled down the gravel driveway, leaving a trail of exhaust that hung in the cold morning air. Maya watched until it disappeared around the bend, then turned her gaze back to the hill. She'd been up there before, of course, dozens of times. She'd circle the house, peeking through cracks in the boarded windows, running her fingers along the weathered logs, imagining what it must have been like when people lived there. The house called to her in a way she couldn't explain, like it was waiting for something or someone. Sometimes she'd sit on the edge of the property, hidden behind a fallen tree, and just watch the house. She'd see how the light hit it differently at different times of day, how shadows moved across its face like emotions, how the wind made it creak and groan like it was trying to speak. That morning, the sky was heavy with clouds, the kind that promised rain by afternoon. The air felt electric, charged with something Maya couldn't name. She grabbed her backpack, the one with the broken zipper, and stuffed it with a flashlight, a notebook, and a granola bar she'd been saving. She told herself she was just going to explore the edge of the woods, maybe collect some pine cones for a school project. But her feet carried her up the hill, through the overgrown path, past the rusted no trespassing sign that had been there so long the letters had faded to ghosts. The log house loomed before her, larger than it seemed from a distance. Its walls were dark with age, the wood split and weathered by more than 160 years of seasons. The stone chimney rose from the center, crumbling at the top, and ivy crawled up the sides like it was trying to pull the whole structure back into the earth. Maya approached slowly, her heart thumping in her chest, not from fear, but from anticipation. The front porch groaned under her weight as she stepped onto it, testing the boards. Some were solid, others felt soft with rot. She could see where the front door had once been, a massive piece of oak now sealed shut with boards nailed in an X pattern. She'd never been inside before. The doors were always locked, the windows boarded tight. But today, as she circled around to the back, she noticed something different. One of the boards covering a low window had come loose, probably from last week's storm. It hung at an angle, leaving a gap just wide enough for a small body to slip through. Maya hesitated, her hand resting on the rough wood. She thought about her grandmother's warning, about the stories, about the rules she was supposed to follow. But then she thought about the letter hidden under the bills, about the $3,000 they didn't have, about the way Ruth's hands shook when she thought Maya wasn't looking. She thought about her grandmother cutting pills in half, about the electricity bill with the red stamp that said final notice, about how Ruth sometimes sat at the kitchen table at night with her head in her hands, crying so quietly she thought Maya couldn't hear from the next room. She didn't know what she was searching for. Maybe just an escape, a place where poverty wasn't pressing down on her shoulders. Maybe just a moment where she could be brave instead of small. Maya took a breath, dropped her backpack through the gap, and squeezed through after it. The inside of the house was darker than she expected, even with the afternoon light filtering through cracks in the walls. Dust hung thick in the air, swirling in the beams of light, like tiny galaxies. The floor was uneven, the old planks creaking beneath her feet, and the smell was overwhelming. Old wood, damp stone, something sweet and rotten like fruit left too long in the sun. There was another smell too, something metallic and cold that reminded Maya of the way the air smells right before a storm. She pulled out her flashlight and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a large room that must have been the main living area. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth still black with ancient soot. Broken furniture sat scattered around, a table with 3 legs, a chair missing its back, shelves that had collapsed under their own weight. Everything was covered in dust so thick it looked like snow. Against one wall, a staircase led up to a second floor, but several steps were missing, creating dark gaps like missing teeth. Maya walked slowly, carefully, her footsteps echoing in the emptiness. She ran her flashlight over the walls, over the rough-hewn logs, over the remnants of newspaper used as insulation, dated 1923. She could make out headlines about prohibition and silent films, about a world that had vanished long before she was born. In one corner, she found a stack of old photographs in rotted frames, their subjects faded to ghosts, but she could still make out the shapes of people, a man with a serious expression and dark eyes, women in long dresses, children with solemn faces. She wondered if one of them was Samuel, the man who'd built this place, who'd lived here alone, who'd died with secrets. She moved toward the fireplace, drawn by something she couldn't name. The stonework was beautiful, each rock carefully placed and mortared, the kind of craftsmanship you didn't see anymore. The stones were different colors, gray and red and brown, fitted together like a puzzle. She reached out and touched the cold surface, tracing the lines between stones. That's when she noticed it. One stone, about knee-height on the right side of the hearth, sat slightly askew. The mortar around it had crumbled away, leaving a dark gap, and when she pressed against it, it shifted. Her heart began to race. She set down her flashlight and used both hands, wiggling the stone back and forth. It was heavy, must have weighed 30 or 40 pounds, but it moved. Inch by inch, she worked it free until finally it came loose with a grinding sound that made her freeze, listening for any sign that she wasn't alone. Silence. Just the wind outside and the settling of old wood. She pulled the stone completely out and set it aside. Behind it was darkness, a hollow space. She grabbed her flashlight and shined it into the gap. A metal ring, like a door handle, was bolted to something wooden. Maya's breath came faster. Her hands trembled as she reached inside and gripped the ring. She pulled. At first, nothing happened. Then, with a creak that sounded like the house itself was waking up, a section of the floor inside the fireplace began to lift. It was a trap door, hidden, sealed, forgotten. The hinges groaned with rust and age, but they held. Maya pulled harder, using all her weight, and the door swung open, revealing a set of stone steps descending into absolute darkness. A root cellar. Of course. Most old houses had them, places to store food, to keep things cool, to hide during storms or raids. But something about this one felt different. The air that rose from below was cold and dry, not damp and moldy like she'd expected. It smelled like metal and old paper, and something else she couldn't identify, something that reminded her of the inside of Ruth's jewelry box, the one place where precious things were kept safe. Maya stood at the edge, shining her flashlight down. The beam didn't reach the bottom. The stairs looked solid, though, carved from stone and set deep into the earth. The walls were stone too, fitted together without mortar, the ancient technique of dry stacking that could last forever if done right. Every instinct told her to close the door, to put the stone back, to run home and pretend she'd never been here. But curiosity is a powerful thing, especially in a child who'd spent her whole life being told to stay small, to not ask for too much, to accept that some things were just out of reach. She put one foot on the first step. It held. She took another step, then another. The temperature dropped with each one, and the darkness pressed in around her. Her flashlight beam bounced off stone walls, narrow and close. She counted the steps as she went. 10, 15, 20. Finally, at 23 steps, her foot touched flat ground. She was in a chamber, maybe 10 feet by 12 feet, with a ceiling so low she could almost touch it if she stretched. But what filled the space made her gasp out loud. Wooden crates, dozens of them, stacked neatly along the walls. Metal boxes with heavy locks, glass jars lined up on crude shelves, trunks with brass fittings. Everything was arranged with care, with purpose, like someone had been curating a collection, like someone had spent years, maybe decades, building something down here in the dark. Maya approached the nearest crate, her hands shaking. It was made of old wood, the kind that had darkened with age, and it was sealed with nails that had rusted orange. Stenciled on the side in faded black paint were the words, "Handle with care and a date, 1892. She ran her fingers along the edge, then noticed that one corner had split slightly, the wood warped from decades of temperature changes. She could see inside, just barely. Something gleamed in her flashlight beam, something gold. She worked her fingers into the crack and pried, and the old wood gave way easier than she expected. A piece broke off, then another. Finally, she could reach inside. Her hand closed around something cold and heavy. She pulled it out and held it up to the light. It was a coin, but not like any coin she'd ever seen. It was thick, solid gold, with a profile of a woman on one side and an eagle on the other. The detail was incredible, every feather on the eagle, every curl in the woman's hair. The date read 1876. Maya had learned about the centennial in school, the 100th birthday of America. This coin was from that year, which meant it was 149 years old. Maya's heart hammered so hard she could hear it in her ears. She set the coin down carefully on a nearby trunk and opened the crate further. Inside were more coins, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all gold, all old, packed carefully in rotted fabric that might have once been velvet. Each coin was in its own little pocket, protected, preserved. This wasn't just money someone had stashed away. This was a collection, organized by someone who understood value. She moved to the next crate, pried it open. This one held silver coins, stacked in rolls wrapped in brittle paper, each one marked with dates from the 1800s. Liberty-seated dollars, Morgan dollars, trade dollars. Names she'd never heard, but that sounded important. Each roll was labeled in careful handwriting, the ink faded but still legible. The next box contained paper, bills that looked ancient, their edges brown and brittle. She recognized some of them from history class: Confederate money, old U.S. currency with denominations she didn't know existed, $50 bills, $100 bills, $500 bills, even $1,000 bills with faces she didn't recognize. But these weren't crispy new like money from the bank. These were old, preserved in protective sleeves, valuable not just for their denomination but for their history. She moved through the cellar like she was walking through a dream. Every container she opened revealed something new. One trunk held jewelry, necklaces dripping with stones that caught the light like fire, emeralds and rubies and sapphires and diamonds, rings set with gems the size of her thumbnail, bracelets so heavy she could barely lift them. Some pieces looked Victorian with intricate filigree work. Others were simpler, older, maybe colonial era. Each piece was wrapped individually in cloth and tucked into compartments lined with faded silk. Another trunk held documents, land deeds with wax seals, stock certificates from companies Maya had never heard of, letters written in careful script on paper so old it felt like fabric. She picked up one letter carefully and read the date, April 14th, 1865, the day Abraham Lincoln was shot. The letter was from someone named Thomas, writing to Samuel about the end of the war, about going home, about hoping to see each other again someday. There were maps, too, hand-drawn maps of Harlan County from the 1800s, showing property lines and mineral deposits. One map had red X marks all over it, with notes in the margins about coal veins and timber rights. Another showed the town as it had been in 1900, with streets and buildings that didn't exist anymore. One metal box, smaller than the others, sat on a stone shelf by itself. It had a combination lock, but the mechanism had rusted through. Maya pried it open with a piece of broken wood. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that crackled when she touched it, was a leather journal. She opened it carefully, the pages crackling under her fingers. The leather cover was embossed with initials, S.W. Samuel Whitaker, probably. The handwriting was neat, controlled. The first entry was dated December 5th, 1976. My name is Samuel Whitaker, and if you're reading this, then I am gone, and my secret has finally been found. I hope it is found by someone who needs it, someone honest, someone who will use it to build rather than destroy. This collection represents 63 years of careful acquisition, of patient saving, of believing that someday someone would come who was meant to have it. I started collecting when I was just 15 years old, with a single gold coin my father gave me before he died in the mines. I told myself I would never be poor again, never be powerless again, and so I collected, traded, invested, saved. I bought land when it was cheap and sold it when it was dear. I lived simply so my collection could grow, but I have no family I trust, no heirs who wouldn't squander this fortune on greed and vice. My nephew would gamble it away. My niece would sell it to the first dealer who offered. They don't understand the value of patience, of preservation. So I hide it here, in the house I built with my own hands, and I wait. Whoever finds this, know that it is yours by right of discovery, by courage, by fate. Do not let them take it from you. Fight for it. It is worth fighting for. The total value, by my last calculation in November of 1976, is approximately $230 million. I pray it falls into worthy hands. Maya read the words 3 times, her hands trembling so badly the pages shook. $230 million. The number was so large, it didn't even feel real. She looked around the cellar again, at the crates and boxes, at the treasures hidden in the dark for nearly 50 years. Her mind struggled to comprehend what she was seeing, what this meant. She thought about her grandmother stirring watery oatmeal, about the letter demanding $3,000, about the cottage they were about to lose. She thought about how Ruth's hands shook, how she wore the same 3 outfits because she couldn't afford new clothes, how she sometimes skipped dinner and said she wasn't hungry so Maya could eat more. She thought about the pills cut in half, about the worried lines that never left Ruth's face, about the way her grandmother's shoulders had started to curve forward like she was carrying an invisible weight, and she thought about the words in the journal. "It is yours by right of discovery." Maya carefully closed the journal and tucked it into her backpack. She took the gold coin too, just one, evidence that this was real, that she wasn't imagining things. Then she made her way back up the stone steps, through the trapdoor, past the fireplace. She replaced the loose stone as best she could, grabbed her backpack, and climbed back out through the window into the fading afternoon light. The sky had grown darker while she'd been inside. Thunder rumbled in the distance, deep and ominous, and the first fat drops of rain began to fall, cold and heavy. Maya ran down the hill, through the woods, her heart racing, her mind spinning with impossible thoughts. By the time she reached the cottage, she was soaked, her clothes clinging to her skin, her hair plastered to her face. Water dripped from her jacket and pooled on the floor. Ruth's car was in the driveway. Maya burst through the front door, breathless, wild-eyed, and found her grandmother sitting at the kitchen table, her head in her hands, surrounded by papers. Bills, all of them. Red stamps that said "Final Notice," "Past Due," "Collections." One envelope was still unopened, sitting on top of the pile, from the county assessor's office. Probably another warning about the property taxes. Ruth looked up, startled, her eyes red-rimmed. "Maya, where have you been? You're soaked through." She stood quickly, grabbing a towel from the bathroom, but Maya didn't move. She just stood there, dripping, staring at her grandmother with an expression Ruth couldn't read. "Nana," she said, her voice small but steady, "I found something." Ruth wrapped the towel around her shoulders, frowning. "Found what, sweetheart?" Maya reached into her backpack, her fingers closing around the cold metal of the coin. She pulled it out and held it up. In the dim light of the kitchen, the gold seemed to glow, catching what little light filtered through the windows and throwing it back brighter. Ruth froze, her eyes widening. "Where did you get that?" "The old log house," Maya whispered. "There's a cellar. It's full of them. Full of everything. Gold and silver and jewelry and papers and a journal that says it's worth $230 million. And I think we're going to be okay, Nana. I think maybe we can pay the taxes. I think maybe we don't have to leave." For a long moment, Ruth just stared at the coin, then at Maya, then back at the coin. Her hand reached out slowly, trembling, and she took it from Maya's palm. She turned it over, examined it, held it up to the light. She ran her thumb across the surface, feeling the weight, the authenticity. When she looked back at her granddaughter, tears were streaming down her face. "Show me," Ruth whispered. "Show me what you found." The rain pounded against the roof as Maya led her grandmother back up the hill, both of them wrapped in rain slickers that didn't quite keep out the cold. Their flashlights cutting through the storm, bouncing off trees and mud and rushing water. The wind howled through the branches, and lightning split the sky, illuminating the old log house in brief, stark flashes that made it look alive. But neither of them turned back. They climbed through the window, crossed the dusty floor, and stood together at the fireplace, water dripping from their clothes onto the old wood. Maya removed the loose stone and opened the trapdoor. Ruth's breath caught in her throat as she stared down into the darkness. "Oh my God," she whispered. "How long has this been here?" "Since 1976, I think," Maya said. "Maybe longer. The journal says he collected for 63 years. They descended together, Ruth moving carefully on the stone steps, one hand on the wall for balance. And when Ruth's flashlight swept across the cellar, across the crates and boxes and treasures hidden for decades, she made a sound that was half sob, half laugh. She moved through the space like someone in a trance, opening boxes, touching coins, reading documents. Her hands shook as she lifted a necklace from one of the trunks, emeralds the size of grapes strung on a gold chain. "This is real," she kept saying. "This is all real." Finally, she sank down onto one of the trunks, her head in her hands, shoulders shaking. Maya sat beside her, small and quiet, waiting. The only sound was their breathing and the distant rumble of thunder above. "Do you know what this means?" Ruth finally asked, her voice thick with emotion. Maya shook her head. "This is more money than we'll ever need. More than we could spend in 10 lifetimes. Maya, sweetheart, you just saved us. You saved everything." But even as relief washed over Ruth's face, something else crept in. Worry. She looked at Maya seriously, taking her small hands in her own. "We can't tell anyone about this. Not yet. We need to be smart. We need to figure out who this legally belongs to, how to claim it, how to protect it. There are laws about treasure trove, about abandoned property. We need lawyers, good ones, and we need to be careful because if word gets out, people will come. People who think they have more right to this than we do. Promise me you won't say a word to anyone. Not your friends, not your teachers, no one," Maya promised. But even as she did, she felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with her wet clothes, because hidden in the shadows of the cellar behind one of the larger crates, she'd noticed something she hadn't mentioned to Ruth. Scratch marks on the stone wall, fresh ones, the kind made by metal tools, not weathered by age. Like someone had been down here recently. Like someone had been trying to pry open the stone, searching for a way in from another direction. Like someone else knew about this place. And somewhere in the distance, through the storm, through the walls of the old log house, came a sound. The creak of a floorboard on the level above them, the soft thud of a door closing. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving across the floor overhead. Ruth heard it too. Her eyes went wide, and she gripped Maya's hand tightly. "Did you lock the trapdoor behind us?" she whispered. Maya shook her head. They'd left it open. The footsteps stopped, right above them, right at the fireplace. Then came a man's voice, muffled but clear enough. "I know you're down there, and I know what you found." They weren't alone. They never had been. Ruth's grip on Maya's hand tightened until it hurt. The voice came again from above, deeper this time, more insistent. "I said I know you're down there. Been watching this place for 3 weeks now. Saw the girl go in this afternoon. Saw you both come back in the rain." The footsteps moved closer to where the trap door gaped open. A beam of light swept down the stone steps, brighter and harsher than their flashlights. Ruth pulled Maya behind one of the larger crates, pressing a finger to her lips. They crouched in the darkness, hearts hammering, barely breathing. The beam of light played across the cellar walls, illuminating the stacks of crates and trunks. "Don't be scared," the man said, his voice echoing down the stairs. "I'm not here to hurt anyone. Name's Leonard. I'm just a historian. Been researching Samuel Whitaker for my dissertation. Spent 2 years tracking down every record, every story. I know what's supposed to be down there." Ruth's mind raced. A historian. That could be legitimate, or it could be a lie. She squeezed Maya's hand 3 times, their secret signal. Stay quiet, stay hidden. "Look," Leonard continued, "I know this seems bad, me showing up like this. But I've been trying to figure out who owns this property for months. County records are a mess. Samuel died without a clear will. No living relatives filed claims. Place has been in legal limbo for 47 years. He paused. "I saw you find the coin. Saw the girl put it in her backpack. I'm guessing you've seen what else is down there by now. Ruth's jaw clenched. He'd been watching them. Watching Maya. For how long? And why hadn't he approached them directly instead of lurking in the shadows? I'm coming down, Leonard said. Don't run. We need to talk about this. His boots hit the first stone step, then the second. Ruth looked around desperately for another exit, but there was none. They were trapped in a stone box 23 steps underground with a stranger descending toward them. She grabbed the nearest heavy object, an old iron lockbox, and held it ready. Leonard reached the bottom step and swept his flashlight across the cellar. The beam found them immediately, huddled behind the crate. He was younger than his voice suggested, maybe 40, with wire-rimmed glasses and a worn leather jacket. He looked more like a graduate student than a threat, but Ruth didn't lower the lockbox. Easy, he said, raising one hand. I'm not armed. I'm not dangerous. I'm just someone who spent half his adult life studying Samuel Whitaker, and I need to see if what I think is down here is actually down here. You were trespassing, Ruth said, her voice steadier than she felt. Following us, watching a child. Leonard had the decency to look ashamed. I know how it looks. But when you spend years researching something, and then you finally find it, and then someone else finds it first, you don't exactly think clearly. He lowered his flashlight so it wasn't shining in their eyes. Please, just give me 5 minutes. Let me explain who Samuel Whitaker was and why this matters. Ruth hesitated, then slowly set down the lockbox. 5 minutes. Then we're leaving, and if you follow us, I'm calling the sheriff. Leonard nodded and leaned against one of the stone walls, careful not to touch anything. Samuel Whitaker came to Harlan County in 1863, right in the middle of the Civil War. He was just 17 years old, running from something, no one knows what. He built that log house with his own hands, every log, every stone. Took him 2 years. By 1865, he was buying land, trading in timber and coal rights. Smart trades, patient investments. By 1900, he was one of the wealthiest men in eastern Kentucky, but no one knew it because he lived like a pauper. Maya peeked out from behind her grandmother, curiosity overcoming fear. Leonard noticed and softened his voice. Samuel never married, never had children, kept to himself, but he was obsessed with collecting coins, artifacts, documents, anything that held historical value. People thought he was eccentric, maybe a little crazy. They said he'd sit up in that house counting his money like a dragon guarding treasure. Leonard pushed his glasses up. Then in 1978, he disappeared, just gone. His house was locked up tight, but when the county finally got a warrant to enter, they found nothing. No body, no treasure, no explanation. Just an empty house and more questions than answers. The town called it Samuel's Lost Fortune, Leonard continued. Kids told stories about it. Treasure hunters came for years, digging up his property, breaking into his house, searching. But no one ever found anything. Eventually, people decided it was just a legend. That maybe Samuel had never had a fortune at all. Maybe he'd just been a crazy old man who liked to pretend. Ruth's voice was quiet. But you didn't believe that. No, Leonard said. Because I found his sister's letters. She lived in Virginia, and they corresponded for decades. In her letters, she mentioned his collection constantly, worried about it, begged him to put it in a bank, to insure it, to tell someone where it was. In her last letter, dated November 1977, she wrote, "Brother, you cannot take it with you. What good is a fortune if it vanishes when you do?" He looked at the crates surrounding them. He never responded to that letter. 3 months later, he was gone. Maya's small voice broke the silence. The journal says he wanted someone worthy to find it, someone who needed it. Leonard's eyes widened. There's a journal? Ruth stepped protectively in front of Maya. That's enough. We've listened to your story. Now we're leaving. Wait, Leonard said, not moving toward them. I'm not here to take anything. I'm here to help. Because if you think you can just walk out of here with a $230 million collection and no one will challenge you, you're wrong. Samuel's nephew is still alive, lives about 40 miles from here. Man named Marcus Whitaker. He's been trying to claim this property for decades, but the courts keep saying there's no proof of value, no reason to clear the title. The moment he finds out there actually is a fortune, he'll come for it with lawyers and guns if he has to. Ruth felt her stomach drop. How would he find out? Because I'm not the only one who's been researching this. Marcus hired a private investigator 2 years ago. Same investigator who's been photographing everyone who comes near this property. Leonard pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, then held it up. On the screen was a photograph of Maya, taken from a distance, climbing through the window of the log house. The timestamp read, today's date, 3 hours and 17 minutes ago. This was uploaded to a shared folder 45 minutes ago. Marcus has already seen it. The blood drained from Ruth's face. Maya pressed closer to her grandmother, suddenly understanding that finding the treasure was just the beginning of something much more complicated and dangerous. So what do we do? Ruth asked. Leonard straightened. You need to file a claim immediately. Treasure trove law in Kentucky is complex, but finders generally have rights, especially on abandoned property with no clear ownership. You need a lawyer who specializes in estate law and antiquities. You need documentation, photographs, appraisals. And you need to move fast, because Marcus will file a competing claim the moment he knows what's here. We can't afford a lawyer, Ruth said quietly. We can't even afford our property taxes. Leonard was quiet for a moment, then said something that surprised them both. I'll help you. Not for money. For the story, for the chance to study this collection, to write about it, to finally prove I wasn't crazy for spending all these years chasing a legend. He looked at the crates surrounding them. This is the find of a lifetime. And I think Samuel would have wanted it to go to someone like you. Someone who needs it. Not someone like Marcus who already has money and just wants more. Ruth studied him, searching for deception and finding only earnest desperation. Why should we trust you? Because if I wanted to steal it, I could have done it weeks ago when I first found the trapdoor. Leonard gestured to the scratch marks on the wall that Maya had noticed. Those are mine. I've been trying to figure out if there was another entrance, a way in from outside, but the whole cellar is sealed solid except for that one trapdoor. Samuel built it that way on purpose. One way in, one way out. Easy to defend. He took off his glasses and cleaned them on his shirt. Look, I understand if you don't trust me, but Marcus will be here by morning, and when he comes, you'll need someone on your side who understands the law and the history. Ruth looked down at Maya, who nodded slightly. Sometimes you have to trust someone, even when it's scary. Okay, Ruth said finally, but we do this my way. We document everything, we follow the law, and we don't tell anyone else until we have our legal claim filed. They spent the next hour photographing every item in the cellar, Leonard explaining the historical significance, while Ruth took notes and Maya carefully opened crates. There were coins from every era of American history, including several so rare Leonard literally gasped when he saw them. One gold coin, a 1849 double eagle, was worth an estimated $4 million alone. Another, an 1833 double eagle, might be worth $10 million. The documents were even more valuable. Land grants signed by Thomas Jefferson, letters from Civil War generals, original stock certificates from companies like Standard Oil and U.S. Steel, purchased when they were worth pennies, now worth millions. There were deed transfers showing Samuel had once owned half the coal rights in Harlan County, rights that had been sold and resold but whose original documentation was right here in this cellar. "Do you understand what this means?" Leonard asked, his voice shaking with excitement. "This isn't just a treasure, it's a historical archive. Museums will want this, universities, the Smithsonian. This collection documents 150 years of American economic history from the ground level." But Ruth was thinking about something more immediate. "If it's worth what you say it's worth, we'll never be poor again. Maya can go to college. I can afford my medicine. We can fix the cottage, pay the taxes, maybe even help the town." Her voice broke. "After all these years of barely surviving, we might actually be okay." Maya tugged on her grandmother's sleeve. "The journal said to fight for it, that it's worth fighting for." Ruth knelt down and hugged her granddaughter tightly. "Then we'll fight, baby, whatever it takes." They climbed out of the cellar just as midnight approached, exhausted and overwhelmed. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and smelling of rain. Leonard followed at a respectful distance as Ruth and Maya made their way back to the cottage. At the edge of the property, he stopped. "I'll contact a lawyer I know in Lexington," he said. "Professor of mine from law school before I switched to history. She specializes in property disputes and historical claims. She owes me a favor. I'll have her call you tomorrow." "Why are you really helping us?" Ruth asked. Leonard smiled sadly. "Because I spent 7 years in graduate school studying Samuel Whitaker while my friends got real jobs and bought houses. My wife left me because I was obsessed with a dead man's secrets. I gave up a lot for this research, and I need it to mean something. If helping you means I get to finally finish my dissertation and prove I wasn't wasting my life, then that's enough for me." Ruth nodded slowly. "Thank you, and I'm sorry I threatened to hit you with a lockbox." "I would have done the same thing," Leonard said, then disappeared into the darkness. Inside the cottage, Ruth made hot chocolate while Maya changed into dry pajamas. They sat together on the worn couch, wrapped in a blanket, trying to process what had happened. The gold coin sat on the coffee table between them, gleaming in the lamplight. "Nana," Maya said quietly, "what if that man, Marcus, tries to take it all away from us?" Ruth pulled her closer. "Then we'll fight him in court. We'll get lawyers and judges involved. We'll prove that Samuel wanted someone like us to find it, someone who would appreciate it and use it for good." "But what if he's mean? What if he's dangerous?" Ruth was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Some people spend their whole lives being mean, taking what they want, stepping on whoever gets in their way, but that doesn't mean they win. Sometimes the small people, the quiet people, the people everyone underestimates, sometimes they're the ones who surprise everyone. What happens next will test this grandmother and granddaughter in ways they never imagined, reveal secrets that have poisoned a family for generations, and prove that sometimes the greatest treasures aren't found in cellars, but in the courage to stand your ground. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Maya fell asleep on the couch, exhausted from the day's adventure. Ruth carried her to bed, tucked her in, and then spent the rest of the night at the kitchen table, reading through the photographs on Leonard's camera that he'd left with them. Each image was a revelation, a piece of history, a fragment of Samuel's obsession. She found a photograph of a letter dated June 12, 1977. It was from Marcus Whitaker to his uncle Samuel. The tone was demanding, almost threatening. "You can't hide your fortune forever. I'm your only living relative. When you die, it all comes to me anyway. You might as well give me some now. I have debts. I have needs. What do you need at your age? Just living expenses and that crumbling house." Samuel's response was paper-clipped to the letter. It was just one line, written in his careful script. "You will get nothing from me, neither in life nor in death. I would rather it rot in the ground than feed your vice." Ruth felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't just about money. This was about punishment, about a man so disgusted with his only heir that he'd chosen to hide a fortune rather than let it pass to him. But what had Marcus done to earn such contempt? She found another letter, this one from a lawyer in Lexington, dated August 1977. Mr. Whitaker, I must advise you that your nephew's gambling debts have reached critical levels. He owes money to dangerous people. While I understand your reluctance to enable his behavior, I fear for his safety if he cannot pay. Whatever your feelings about him, he is still family. Samuel's response was equally curt. Let him learn what consequences feel like. 3 months later, Samuel disappeared. Ruth sat back in her chair, pieces clicking together. Had Marcus done something to his uncle? Had the gambling debts driven him to violence? Or had Samuel simply walked away, staged his own disappearance to ensure Marcus could never claim anything? The next morning, Ruth called in sick to the library for the first time in 3 years. She and Maya needed to stay home, needed to figure out their next move. Leonard's lawyer friend, a woman named Patricia Chen, called at 8 in the morning. Leonard briefed me on your situation, Patricia said, her voice crisp and professional. I'm going to be very direct with you, Mrs. Fletcher. You've stumbled into what could be the most valuable treasure trove discovery in Kentucky history, and you're about to enter a legal battle that could take years to resolve. Ruth's heart sank. Years? Unless we're very strategic. Here's what I need you to do. First, document everything. Every coin, every document, every artifact. Second, do not remove anything from that cellar except what you've already taken. Third, file a formal treasure trove claim with the county by end of business today. Fourth, be prepared for Marcus Whitaker to file a competing claim as Samuel's heir. What are our chances? Ruth asked. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Honestly, 50-50. Kentucky treasure trove law generally favors the finder on abandoned property, but Marcus will argue the property wasn't truly abandoned, that he always intended to claim his inheritance once the estate was settled. He'll say the treasure belongs to Samuel's estate, which means it belongs to him as the sole heir. But Samuel's journal says he wanted someone else to find it. A journal isn't a legal will, and even if it were, wills can be contested. But here's what might work in your favor. If we can prove Marcus was estranged from Samuel, that Samuel explicitly didn't want him to have the fortune, a judge might rule that the treasure was intentionally hidden from the heir, which could void Marcus's claim. How do we prove that? Find more letters. Find witnesses who knew Samuel, who can testify about the relationship. Build a narrative that Samuel was protecting this fortune from Marcus specifically. Patricia paused. And be careful. Men who gamble away fortunes and accumulate dangerous debts don't always play by legal rules. After the call ended, Ruth sat Maya down at the kitchen table. Baby, we need to be very careful from now on. The man who might try to take this away from us, Marcus, he might not be a good person. So here's what we're going to do. When you're at school, you stay inside. Don't walk anywhere alone. If anyone asks you questions about the old log house, you say you were just exploring and you didn't find anything interesting. Can you do that? Maya nodded solemnly. I can keep secrets. I know you can, sweetheart. You're the bravest girl I know. They spent the morning back in the cellar, this time with better lights and proper documentation. Leonard joined them, bringing a professional camera and archival gloves. They worked methodically, photographing every item, creating an inventory, estimating values based on Leonard's historical knowledge. By noon, they had documented over 4,000 individual items. The conservative estimate put the total value at $215 million. The optimistic estimate went as high as $280 million. Some of these coins, Leonard said, holding up an 1894 proof silver dollar, there are only known to be 12 in existence. This could sell at auction for $2 million or more. And this He carefully lifted a small painting from one of the trunks. If I'm not mistaken, this is an original Winslow Homer. Unsigned, but the style is unmistakable. Could be worth 20 million. Ruth had to sit down. The numbers were too large to comprehend. She'd spent her whole life worrying about $3,000 in property taxes, and now she was standing in a room worth $250 million. They were so focused on their work that they didn't hear the vehicles pull up outside, didn't hear the footsteps approaching the house, didn't know anything was wrong until a man's voice boomed from above. "I know someone's down there. This is private property and you're trespassing." Ruth, Maya, and Leonard froze. This voice was different from Leonard's, harder, angrier, more entitled. "That's Marcus," Leonard whispered. "He got here faster than I thought." Heavy footsteps crossed the floor above them. Then came the sound of more people, at least 3 or 4 sets of boots. Marcus had brought reinforcements. "You've got 10 seconds to come up," Marcus shouted, "or I'm calling the sheriff and having you arrested for breaking and entering." Ruth looked at Leonard, panic in her eyes. "What do we do?" "We go up," he said. "We don't have a choice, but stay calm. Don't admit to finding anything. Let me do the talking." They climbed the stone steps slowly, emerging into the main room of the log house. 4 men stood waiting. The one in front was clearly Marcus Whitaker. He was in his late 50s, overweight, with a face reddened by years of alcohol and anger. He wore expensive clothes that didn't quite fit right, and his eyes were calculating and cold. Behind him stood 3 younger men, probably hired muscle, the kind who got paid to look intimidating and occasionally break things when intimidation wasn't enough. Marcus's eyes locked onto Maya, then Ruth, then Leonard. Well, a historian, a grandmother, and a child. Quite the treasure-hunting crew. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm Marcus Whitaker, sole heir to Samuel Whitaker's estate. This house and everything in it belongs to me. So I'll ask you politely to leave. Now." Ruth stepped forward, positioning herself between Marcus and Maya. "The property records show this land has been abandoned for 47 years. No taxes paid, no claims filed, no active ownership." Marcus's smile widened. "That's about to change. I'm filing an estate claim today, and when I do, anything found on this property becomes part of that estate, which means it's mine. Unless someone else filed a treasure trove claim first," Leonard said quietly. Marcus's smile vanished. "You filed already?" "Application goes in at 2 o'clock today," Patricia Chen said, stepping through the front door with a briefcase and a confidence that filled the room. "I'm Mrs. Fletcher's attorney, and unless you have a court order giving you access to this property, you're the one who's trespassing, Mr. Whitaker." The room crackled with tension. Marcus's jaw clenched and his hands balled into fists. "You have no idea what you're starting, lady." "Actually, I have a very clear idea. I've handled 7 treasure trove cases in Kentucky, and I've won 6 of them. So unless you'd like to make this 8 for 8, I suggest you leave and have your attorney contact mine." Patricia handed him a business card. "We'll settle this in court, like civilized people." Marcus stared at the card, then at Ruth, then at Maya. His gaze lingered on the child, and something dark flickered across his face. "I know who you are," he said to Ruth. "Fletcher, right? You work at the library. Make what, $9 an hour? Live in that falling-apart cottage down the hill? Can't even afford to fix your car's muffler. I can hear you coming from a mile away." Ruth's face flushed, but she held her ground. Marcus continued, his voice dripping with contempt. "You really think you can fight me? I've got money, connections, lawyers who actually win cases. You've got nothing. By the time this goes to court, you'll be drowning in legal fees, and I'll buy that little cottage of yours for pennies on the dollar just to watch you pack your things." "Mr. Whitaker," Patricia said sharply, "you're now threatening my client, which I'm recording." She held up her phone. "That's evidence of harassment, which won't look good to a judge. I suggest you leave. Now." Marcus took a step toward Patricia, and his 3 men moved with him. But Leonard stepped between them, his hands up. "Everyone needs to calm down. This is a historical site. Whatever's here, it belongs in museums and universities, not in anyone's private collection. Let's let the courts decide ownership and let historians decide preservation." Marcus laughed, a harsh sound. "You think I care about history? My uncle was a crazy hoarder who cost my family millions by hiding his fortune instead of investing it properly. Whatever's down there, I'm selling it to the highest bidder and finally getting what my family was owed." "That's exactly why Samuel didn't want you to have it," Ruth said quietly, and immediately regretted it. Marcus's eyes narrowed. "So you have been down there. You know what's there." He pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the sheriff. I'm reporting a theft in progress." "Go ahead," Patricia said calmly. "And I'll show him the filing I already submitted 2 hours ago, along with the research showing this property has been legally abandoned since 1981, when the county seized it for unpaid taxes, then failed to auction it because no one bid, making it effectively unclaimed land." Marcus paused, phone halfway to his ear. "That's not true." "Check the county records. I did. Your uncle disappeared in 1978. The county tried to contact next of kin for 3 years. You never responded, never filed a claim, never paid a single dollar in taxes. You abandoned this property, Mr. Whitaker, which means you abandoned any claim to what might be inside it." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus's face had gone from red to purple. His hands shook with rage. Finally, he lowered his phone and pointed at Ruth. "This isn't over, not even close. I'll see you in court. And when I win, when I take everything that rightfully belongs to me, I'm going to make sure you pay for every day you made me wait." He turned and stormed out, his 3 men following. They climbed into 2 black trucks and roared down the hill, leaving mud tracks across the overgrown driveway. Ruth's legs gave out, and she sank to the floor, Maya rushing to her side. "It's okay, Nana," the little girl whispered. "We're going to win. We have to." But as Patricia gathered her things and Leonard secured the trapdoor, Ruth couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just made an enemy more dangerous than any of them realized. Marcus Whitaker wasn't just fighting for money. He was fighting for something he believed was stolen from him, and men like that didn't stop until they got what they wanted, or until someone stopped them. Outside, hidden in the trees on the ridge above the log house, a camera clicked. The private investigator Marcus had hired adjusted his telephoto lens and captured one more image. Maya Fletcher standing in the doorway, her small hand clutching a leather journal, her face determined despite her fear. He uploaded the photo to Marcus's private server, then packed up his equipment. The war for Samuel Whitaker's fortune had officially begun, and the first battle lines had just been drawn. The next morning, Ruth woke to find an envelope shoved under their front door. No stamp, no return address, just her name scrawled across the front in angry handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a legal notice printed at the top. Notice of intent to file emergency injunction and eviction proceedings. Below it, in smaller text, was a list of claims Marcus Whitaker was making against them: trespassing, theft, destruction of private property, interference with estate settlement. Ruth's hands shook as she read it. At the bottom, handwritten in the same angry scrawl, were the words, "You have 72 hours to vacate the cottage and return all stolen property, or I'll have the sheriff remove you by force." Maya appeared in the doorway, still in her pajamas, her hair a mess of curls. "What's wrong, Nana?" Ruth quickly folded the paper and forced a smile. "Nothing, sweetheart. Just some junk mail." But her voice cracked on the last word, and Maya wasn't fooled. "He's trying to scare us, isn't he? That mean man." Ruth pulled Maya into a hug, holding her tight. "Yes, baby, but scared or not, we're not going anywhere. This is our home." By 9 o'clock, Patricia Chen was at their kitchen table, reading the notice with a frown that deepened with each line. "This is harassment, plain and simple. He has no legal standing to evict you. This cottage isn't part of his uncle's estate. You've been paying rent here for 11 years. "To who?" Ruth asked. "The landlord died 6 years ago. I've just been sending checks to his daughter in Florida. She cashes them, but we've never signed a new lease." Patricia's frown deepened. "That complicates things. Without a current lease, Marcus could argue the cottage sits on land that's adjacent to Samuel's property, and if he can prove Samuel owned it, he might have a case." "But I've been paying rent," Ruth protested, "to someone who may not have had legal authority to collect it. Mrs. Fletcher, I need you to find every receipt, every cancelled check, every piece of paper that proves you've been living here legally and paying for it." Patricia pulled out a yellow legal pad. "We need to establish your right to be here independent of the treasure claim, because Marcus is going to try to use this cottage as leverage." The next 3 days blurred into a nightmare of paperwork, phone calls, and constant fear. Ruth dug through old shoeboxes and filing cabinets, finding 11 years' worth of rent receipts. Patricia worked 18-hour days, filing motions and counter-motions, building their case. Leonard spent every spare moment in the county archives, searching for property records and historical documents that might help. But Marcus worked faster. By Thursday afternoon, he'd filed his own treasure trove claim, arguing that as Samuel's sole living heir, anything found on his uncle's property belonged to him, regardless of who found it. He'd also filed a separate claim on the cottage, producing a property survey from 1962 that showed the cottage sitting on land that had once belonged to Samuel. "He's trying to overwhelm us," Patricia explained during an emergency meeting at the cottage. "Bury us in legal fees and force us to settle. It's a common tactic." "How much are we talking about?" Ruth asked quietly. "My fees? I'm doing this pro bono because Leonard asked, and because I believe in your case. But court costs, filing fees, expert witnesses will need to authenticate the collection that could run $20,000 to $30,000 before we even get to trial." Ruth felt the room spin. "I don't have that kind of money. I have $800 in savings and a maxed-out credit card." Maya, who'd been sitting quietly on the couch, spoke up. "What about the gold coin? Can't we sell it?" Patricia shook her head. "Not until the court determines ownership. If we sell anything now, Marcus will claim we're destroying evidence and liquidating assets that might belong to him." "So we just have to wait?" Maya asked, her voice small. "While he tries to take everything?" "We fight back," Leonard said, standing up from where he'd been studying old maps at the kitchen table. "And I think I found something that might help. Look at this." He spread out a property map from 1889. "This shows Samuel's original land purchase, 53 acres, including the hill where the log house sits. But see this?" He pointed to a dotted line. "This is the boundary. The cottage where you live sits 300 feet outside that boundary. It was built in 1931 by a family named Morrison. Samuel never owned this land." Ruth leaned in, hope flickering. "Are you sure?" "I've got 3 different surveys from 3 different decades, all showing the same thing. The cottage is outside Samuel's property line by a significant margin." Leonard pulled out more papers. "And I found something else. Samuel kept detailed journals from 1895 until his disappearance. The Historical Society in Lexington has them on microfilm. I've been reading through them all week." He pulled out a folder thick with photocopies. "Maya, you found 1 journal in the cellar, but there are dozens more, and they tell a story about Marcus's family that explains everything." They gathered around as Leonard laid out the pages chronologically. The journals were meticulous, dated entries in Samuel's careful handwriting documenting his life, his collection, and his growing disappointment with his family. An entry from March 4, 1953 read, "My brother Thomas died today. Drank himself to death by age 49. He borrowed money from me 27 times over the years, always promising to repay, never doing so. I gave him $12,000 total. He spent it all on whiskey and gambling. His son Marcus is only 11, but already I see his father's weakness in him. God help that boy." Another entry from June 18, 1967. "Marcus came to me again today, asking for money. He's 25 years old and has never held a job for more than 3 months. Says he needs $5,000 to pay gambling debts. I refused. He called me a bitter old miser and said when I die, he'll get everything anyway. I told him he'll get nothing. He laughed and said we'll see about that." The entries continued, painting a picture of a family deteriorating across generations. Marcus's gambling grew worse. He married and divorced twice, leaving debts both times. He was arrested 3 times for writing bad checks. By 1976, Samuel's journal entries about his nephew were filled with disgust and despair. But it was the final journal entry that made everyone in the room fall silent. It was dated November 28, 1977, just weeks before Samuel disappeared. "Marcus came tonight with 2 men I did not recognize. They were not kind men. Marcus demanded I give him $200,000 immediately or his friends would take it by force. I told him I had no such money, that everything I owned was tied up in property and investments. He didn't believe me. They searched the house, broke furniture, threatened me. I am 85 years old, and I was genuinely afraid for my life. After they left, I made a decision. Everything I have spent 63 years collecting, every coin, every document, every piece of my life's work, I am hiding it where Marcus can never find it. And if he does find it someday, it will only be because someone braver and better than him discovered it first. Someone pure of heart, someone worthy. I will not let my life's work fund his vice and violence. Better it should sleep in darkness forever than be destroyed by my own blood." Ruth pressed a hand to her mouth. "He wasn't protecting a fortune. He was protecting it from Marcus specifically." "There's more," Leonard said softly, pulling out the last page. "This is from December 1st, 1977. It's the last entry ever recorded." He began to read aloud. "I am leaving tomorrow morning. I have arranged everything. The collection is sealed where it cannot be found without determination and courage. The house is locked and will appear empty. I have withdrawn all my money from the banks and converted it to cash and coins, which are now part of the collection. I have deeded my remaining property to the county with instructions to let it return to nature. I am taking only what I can carry. I am going somewhere Marcus can never find me. Somewhere I can live out my remaining days in peace, knowing my life's work is safe. To whoever eventually finds this, know that you were meant to find it. Trust in that. Fight for it. It is yours by right of courage and pure intention. Do not let darkness claim what was built in light." The room was silent for a long moment. Then Maya spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "He knew someone like us would find it. He wanted us to have it." "That's beautiful, sweetie," Patricia said gently. "But legally, this doesn't change much. A journal entry isn't a legally binding will. We can use it to establish Samuel's intent, to show he deliberately hid the fortune from his heir, but a judge might still rule that the collection belongs to the estate." "Unless we can prove Samuel gave up his rights to the estate," Leonard said. "If he deeded his property to the county and walked away, that might constitute abandonment of ownership." Patricia nodded slowly. "That's actually brilliant. If we can find that deed, if we can prove Samuel legally divested himself of the property before he disappeared, then Marcus has no claim. Samuel's estate would have ended the moment he signed over his assets." "The county archives," Ruth said. Would they have it? If it was filed, if Samuel actually went through with it. Patricia was already pulling out her phone. I'll have someone search first thing tomorrow morning. But tomorrow felt like a lifetime away. That night, as Ruth tried to sleep, her mind spun with worry. The legal fees, even with Patricia working for free. The court dates that would make her miss work. The possibility that after all this, they might still lose. And underneath it all, the fear that Marcus wouldn't wait for the courts to decide. At 2 a.m, that fear became reality. Ruth woke to the sound of breaking glass. She sat up in bed, heart hammering, and heard footsteps on the porch. Someone was trying to break in. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911, then rushed to Maya's room. Her granddaughter was already awake, sitting up in bed with terrified eyes. Someone's outside, Maya whispered. Ruth pulled her close, and they huddled together as the footsteps moved around the cottage, testing windows, trying doors. The 911 operator said deputies were on their way, but they were 15 minutes out. 15 minutes felt like forever. The back door rattled violently. Then came a man's voice, muffled but clear. I know you're in there. Hand over what you stole, or this gets worse. Ruth recognized the voice. One of the men who'd been with Marcus at the log house. She held Maya tighter and prayed the locks would hold. They did. Just barely. By the time the sheriff's deputies arrived, the intruders had fled, leaving behind a broken window, muddy footprints, and a spray-painted message on the front porch. Time's up. The deputies took a report, dusted for fingerprints, and promised to increase patrols in the area. But they also said something that chilled Ruth to her core. Ma'am, you might want to stay somewhere else for a few days. This is a property dispute and those can turn violent. We can't be here 24/7. This is my home, Ruth said, her voice shaking with anger and fear. I'm not leaving. But the truth was, she was terrified. And worse, the stress was taking a physical toll. By morning, her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't button her shirt. Her chest felt tight, her breath shallow. She'd forgotten to take her heart medication the night before, too focused on keeping Maya safe. Maya noticed. She helped her grandmother with her buttons, brought her pills and water, and spoke with a maturity beyond her 8 years. Nana, we need help. We can't do this alone. Ruth wanted to argue, to say they were fine, but Maya was right. They couldn't fight this battle alone. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. Mrs. Henderson from the general store showed up at their door with a casserole and a fierce expression. I heard what happened last night. Whole town's heard, and I want you to know you're not alone in this. That's kind of you, Ruth began, but Mrs. Henderson held up a hand. I'm not done. Samuel Whitaker was a good man, quiet, kept to himself, but good. He'd give you the shirt off his back if you needed it, though he'd do it so subtle you'd think it was your idea. He helped my family during the coal strike of 1974 when we had nothing. Sent groceries to our house, anonymous-like, but we knew it was him. Her eyes filled with tears. Marcus Whitaker is a bully and a cheat. He's owed money to half the people in this county and paid back none of them. If Samuel wanted to keep his fortune away from that man, then I say good for Samuel. By evening, more people had come. Mr. Patterson, who ran the hardware store, brought new locks and installed them free of charge. The librarian, Mrs. Chen, no relation to Patricia, brought over books for Maya and stayed to keep them company. Father Michael from the Catholic Church came by to offer prayers and support. Even Sheriff Wade stopped by in his personal vehicle, off duty, to say he'd be driving past their cottage every night on his way home. Why are people being so nice? Maya asked after the last visitor had left. Ruth smiled, the first genuine smile in days. Because when you do the right thing, baby, even when it's hard, people notice, and good people want to help good people. The next day, Leonard arrived with news. I found it. The deed transfer. Samuel deeded all his property to Harlan County on December 2, 1977. It was filed in Frankfurt, not here, which is why no one ever found it. The county clerk's office in Frankfurt had it in their archives. He spread the document on the table. Samuel Whitaker, being of sound mind, hereby transfers all property, assets, and holdings to Harlan County, Kentucky, to be held in public trust. Signed and notarized. Patricia grabbed the document, reading quickly, her expression shifting from skepticism to amazement. This is legitimate. He gave everything to the county, which means Samuel's estate was empty the moment he signed this, which means Marcus inherited nothing because there was nothing to inherit. So we win? Maya asked hopefully. Not yet, Patricia said. Marcus will argue the deed is invalid, that Samuel wasn't of sound mind, that it was made under duress. But this changes everything. This proves Samuel's intent was to divest himself of his assets, to ensure Marcus got nothing. The court hearing was set for 2 weeks later. In the meantime, the harassment continued. Someone slashed the tires on Ruth's car. Their mailbox was knocked over 3 times. Threatening phone calls came at all hours, always from blocked numbers, always with the same message: drop the claim or suffer the consequences. Ruth's health deteriorated. The stress triggered her heart condition. She was hospitalized twice, once for chest pains that turned out to be panic attacks, once for dangerously high blood pressure. The doctors warned her that continued stress could lead to a heart attack or stroke. They prescribed more medication, urged her to rest, told her to eliminate sources of anxiety from her life. But how could she? The source of her anxiety was also her salvation. The fortune that could save them was also destroying her health. Maya watched her grandmother grow weaker and felt something harden inside her. She was only 8 years old, but she understood what was happening. Marcus was trying to break them, to make them so exhausted and frightened that they'd give up. And he was succeeding. One night, while Ruth slept fitfully in her bed, Maya crept out to the living room and called Leonard. "We need to fight back," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "Maya, honey, we are fighting. In court, the legal way." "That's too slow. Nana's getting sicker. The doctors said she could die if the stress doesn't stop." Maya's voice cracked. "I found this fortune to save her, not to kill her." Leonard was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What do you want to do?" "I want to tell our story. I want everyone to know what Samuel wanted, what Marcus is doing, why we're fighting. I want people to know the truth." Leonard understood immediately. "You want to go public?" "Yes. That could be dangerous. It could make Marcus even angrier. Or it could make him back down because everyone will be watching." Maya took a deep breath. Samuel said the fortune was meant for someone pure of heart, someone brave. I have to be brave for Nana. The next day, Leonard contacted a journalist he knew at the Lexington Herald-Leader. By the end of the week, Maya Fletcher's story was front-page news. The headline read, "8-year-old girl discovers $200 million fortune hidden for 47 years, fights to save dying grandmother from greedy heir." The article told everything: Samuel's journals, Marcus's violence, the break-in attempts, Ruth's declining health. And at the center of it all, a little girl with curly hair and determined eyes who'd crawled through a broken window and found not just a treasure, but a purpose. The response was overwhelming. News stations picked up the story. Social media exploded with support. A crowdfunding campaign raised $78,000 in 3 days to help with legal fees and medical bills. Letters poured in from around the country, from people who'd been cheated by powerful men, from families who'd lost everything, from those who saw themselves in Ruth and Maya's struggle. The attention changed everything. Suddenly, Marcus couldn't operate in the shadows. His every move was scrutinized. When he tried to file another frivolous motion, journalists reported it. When his lawyer made threatening statements, they were recorded and broadcast. The private investigator he'd hired quit, uncomfortable with the public attention. And slowly, the town of Harlan County rallied. A petition circulated supporting Ruth and Maya's claim, gathering over 2,000 signatures. Local businesses put up signs reading, "We stand with Maya." The elementary school held a fundraiser. Even people who'd been afraid of Marcus began speaking up, sharing their own stories of his cruelty and deception. Ruth watched all this from her bed, where she'd been ordered to rest, tears streaming down her face. "You did this," she said to Maya. "You gave us an army." Maya climbed into bed beside her grandmother and snuggled close. "Samuel said to fight for it. So I'm fighting. We all are." On the morning of the preliminary hearing, over 300 people gathered outside the courthouse. They held signs reading, "Justice for Maya" and "Samuel's Legacy Lives." When Ruth and Maya arrived, supported by Leonard and Patricia, the crowd parted like a sea, then applauded. Marcus arrived with his lawyer and 2 bodyguards, and the crowd booed. He tried to ignore them, but his face was red with rage and humiliation. This wasn't how he'd expected things to go. He'd expected to intimidate a poor woman and her granddaughter into submission. Instead, he'd become the villain in a story the whole state was following. Inside the courtroom, Judge Elizabeth Morrison presided. She was a stern woman in her 60s, known for fairness and impatience with legal games. She'd read all the filings, reviewed all the evidence, and she had questions. "Mr. Whitaker," she addressed Marcus directly, "you claim to be Samuel Whitaker's sole heir and therefore entitled to anything found on his property. Is that correct?" Marcus stood. "Yes, Your Honor." "And yet you made no attempt to claim this property or pay taxes on it for 47 years. Why?" Marcus's lawyer jumped in. "My client was unaware of the property's status, Your Honor." "He was unaware his uncle had died?" Judge Morrison's eyebrow arched. "For 47 years?" "Your Honor, my client was estranged from his uncle, who disappeared without notice." "Disappeared or left?" The judge held up Samuel's deed transfer. "Because according to this document, filed with the state in December of 1977, Samuel Whitaker legally divested himself of all property and assets by transferring them to Harlan County. That doesn't sound like a disappearance. That sounds like a man tying up loose ends before leaving." Marcus's lawyer paled. "We contest the validity of that document, Your Honor. We believe Samuel was not of sound mind when he signed it." "Based on what evidence?" "He was 85 years old, Your Honor. He'd lived alone for decades. Clearly, he was not thinking rationally." Judge Morrison's expression hardened. "Counsel, being old and preferring solitude does not equal incompetence. The document is properly notarized and filed. Unless you have medical evidence that Samuel Whitaker was mentally incapacitated at the time of signing, I'm inclined to accept it as valid." Patricia stood. "Your Honor, if I may, we have Samuel Whitaker's personal journals documenting his state of mind leading up to the deed transfer. They show clear, rational thought and a deliberate decision to ensure his nephew did not inherit his fortune." "I'd like to see those journals," the judge said. What followed was 2 hours of testimony. Leonard read excerpts from Samuel's journals, establishing a pattern of Marcus's behavior and Samuel's growing determination to protect his collection. Patricia presented the deed transfer, property surveys, and historical records. The county clerk from Frankfurt testified about the deed's authenticity. Marcus's lawyer tried to argue that the journals were fabricated, that the deed was coerced, that the collection rightfully belonged to the estate regardless. But with each argument, Judge Morrison grew more skeptical. Finally, she called Maya to the stand. The courtroom fell silent as the 8-year-old girl walked to the witness box, was sworn in, and sat down, her feet barely reaching the floor. "Miss Fletcher," Judge Morrison said gently, "can you tell me in your own words how you found this collection?" Maya took a deep breath and told her story. She talked about being poor, about her grandmother's shaking hands, about wanting to help but not knowing how. She talked about exploring the old house, finding the hidden cellar, and discovering treasures she didn't even understand. And she talked about Samuel's journal, about the words that had stayed with her. "He said it was for someone pure of heart," Maya said, her voice clear and strong. "I don't know if I'm pure of heart. I'm just a kid who wanted to help her nana. But I think Samuel would have wanted us to have it because we needed it, and because we'd use it for good things, not bad things." Judge Morrison studied the little girl for a long moment. Then she said, "Thank you, Miss Fletcher. You may step down." After final arguments, the judge called for a recess to consider her ruling. The wait was agony. Ruth sat outside the courtroom, her heart racing despite her medication. Maya held her hand tightly. Leonard paced. Patricia reviewed her notes, preparing for every possible outcome. 2 hours later, they were called back inside. Judge Morrison had made her decision, and the look on her face told them everything they needed to know. Judge Morrison stood, and the courtroom fell silent. Every person in that room understood they were witnessing something historic, not just a legal ruling, but a moment that would define what justice meant in Harlan County. "I've reviewed all the evidence presented," Judge Morrison began, her voice clear and firm. "The journals of Samuel Whitaker, the deed transfer to Harlan County, the property surveys, and the testimony of all parties involved. This case presents several complex legal questions about inheritance, treasure trove law, and property rights. But at its core, it's actually quite simple." She looked directly at Marcus. "Mr. Whitaker, you claim this fortune as your uncle's heir. But the evidence shows that your uncle took extraordinary measures to ensure you would never inherit his collection. He documented decades of your gambling, your violence, your attempts to extort money from him. And finally, in December of 1977, he legally divested himself of all assets by deeding them to the county. That deed is valid, properly executed, and filed with the state. The moment Samuel Whitaker signed that document, his estate ceased to exist. There was nothing left to inherit." Marcus's face turned scarlet. His lawyer stood quickly. "Your Honor, we intend to appeal—" "Let me finish, Counselor." Judge Morrison's tone brooked no argument. "Furthermore, even if that deed were somehow invalid, Kentucky treasure trove law is clear. When property has been abandoned for over 40 years, when it has no clear owner, when it is discovered by accident through honest exploration, the finder has superior claim. Miss Maya Fletcher found this collection through curiosity and courage. She didn't break in with intent to steal. She didn't have prior knowledge of what was hidden. She simply explored an abandoned building and made a discovery." The judge turned to Ruth and Maya. "Mrs. Fletcher, Miss Fletcher, I'm ruling in your favor. The collection found in the cellar of the Samuel Whitaker property is legally yours by right of discovery. Mr. Whitaker's claim is denied. Furthermore, I'm issuing a restraining order against Mr. Marcus Whitaker and his associates. They are to cease all harassment, all contact, and all attempts to intimidate you. Any violation will result in immediate arrest." The courtroom erupted. People cheered, cried, embraced. Ruth buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with relief. Maya threw her arms around her grandmother, tears streaming down both their faces. Patricia closed her briefcase with a satisfied smile. Leonard wiped his eyes behind his glasses. Marcus stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. Then he turned and stormed out of the courtroom, his lawyer and bodyguards scrambling to follow. The crowd outside booed as he pushed through them to his truck, climbed in and drove away without looking back. He would try to appeal, of course. His lawyers would file motions and challenge the ruling. But everyone in that courtroom knew the battle was over. Justice, for once, had sided with the powerless instead of the powerful. That evening, Ruth and Maya sat together on their worn couch, surrounded by well-wishers who'd followed them home from the courthouse. Mrs. Henderson brought champagne and sparkling cider. Father Michael said a prayer of thanksgiving. The sheriff stopped by to personally deliver the restraining order paperwork and assure them his deputies would enforce it vigorously. But the real celebration came when Patricia arrived with official documents from the county. "It's time to talk about what happens next," she said, spreading papers across the kitchen table. "The court has ruled the collection is yours, but now we need to figure out the practical matters. Authentication, appraisal, security, taxes." "Taxes?" Ruth asked, her joy dimming. She'd spent so long worrying about $3,000 in property taxes that the idea of owing taxes on $230 million made her feel faint. "Kentucky has specific laws about treasure trove taxation," Patricia explained. "You'll owe state and federal taxes on the collection's value once it's officially appraised. We're talking tens of millions of dollars, potentially. But here's the good news. If you donate a significant portion to charity or establish a non-profit foundation, you can offset much of that tax burden. Plus, if you keep items for historical preservation rather than selling them, the tax implications change." Leonard leaned forward. "I've been thinking about this. What if you turned the log house into a museum? Keep the collection intact, open it to the public. You could charge admission, use the proceeds to maintain the property and fund community programs. That way, Samuel's collection does exactly what he wanted. It helps people, it preserves history, and it stays out of the hands of those who destroy it for profit." Maya's eyes lit up. "A museum, where people could come and see everything." "And learn," Leonard added. "We could create educational programs, offer tours, partner with schools. This collection documents 150 years of American history. It belongs in a place where people can study it, appreciate it, learn from it." Ruth was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Then she said, "Samuel wrote in his journal that he hoped the fortune would be found by someone who'd use it to build, not destroy. A museum would be building something. A foundation helping families in need would be building something." She looked at Maya. "What do you think, sweetheart? It's your discovery, too." Maya didn't hesitate. "I think we should help people the way everyone helped us. When Marcus was being mean, the whole town stood up for us. We should stand up for them now. And so, over the next 6 months, while Marcus's appeals were systematically denied by higher courts, Ruth and Maya began building something extraordinary. With Patricia's legal guidance and Leonard's historical expertise, they established the Samuel Whitaker Foundation for Historical Preservation and Community Support. The foundation's mission was twofold: preserve Samuel's collection for educational purposes and provide financial assistance to struggling families in Harlan County. The log house underwent extensive renovation. Contractors stabilized the structure, replaced the roof, restored the windows, and installed climate control systems to protect the artifacts. The root cellar was converted into a secure vault with state-of-the-art security. The main floor became a museum space with carefully curated displays. Leonard served as the museum's first curator, finally able to complete his dissertation with unprecedented access to Samuel's collection. He organized the artifacts by era and theme, creating exhibits that told the story of American economic history through the lens of one man's obsessive collecting. Each display included excerpts from Samuel's journals, giving visitors insight into not just what he collected, but why. The most popular exhibit was called the Pure of Heart display, featuring the original journal entry where Samuel expressed his hope that someone worthy would find his fortune. Beside it was a photograph of 8-year-old Maya squeezing through the window of the log house, her face full of determination and innocence. Below it, her own words were printed, "I just wanted to help my Nana." The museum opened to the public on a warm Saturday in June, exactly 1 year after Maya's discovery. Over 1,500 people attended the grand opening. News crews came from as far as New York and California. But for Ruth and Maya, the most important moment came when they unveiled a bronze plaque beside the front door. It read, "The Samuel Whitaker Museum of History and Hope, founded on the belief that courage, curiosity, and pure intentions can change the world. Dedicated to the memory of Samuel Whitaker, who hid a fortune so it might one day save someone who truly needed saving. Discovered by Maya Fletcher, age 8, who proved him right." The museum was an immediate success. Admission fees were modest, just $10 for adults, $5 for children, free for families who couldn't afford it. But thousands of visitors came each month, drawn by the remarkable story and the incredible collection. The revenue covered all operating costs and funded the foundation's charitable work. The foundation itself transformed Harlan County. Every month, families in crisis could apply for emergency grants to cover medical bills, rent, utilities, or other necessities. The foundation paid off the medical debts of 12 families in its first 6 months. It provided college scholarships to 23 students. It funded a free dental clinic and a food pantry. It gave microloans to small businesses trying to start up in a town where banks had given up. Ruth served as the foundation's president, finally able to use her teaching skills for something greater than she'd ever imagined. She created programs that taught financial literacy, helped people navigate social services, and provided mentorship to single parents. Her health improved dramatically once the stress of poverty and litigation lifted. She still took her heart medication, but her hands no longer shook, and the worry lines around her eyes softened. They moved out of the small cottage into a comfortable home on the edge of town. Nothing ostentatious, just a real house with working heat and appliances that didn't need to be smacked to function. Maya finally got her own bedroom, painted purple with stars on the ceiling. Ruth had a garden where she grew vegetables and flowers. There was a porch swing where they sat together in the evenings, watching the sun set over the hills, marveling at how much their lives had changed. But they didn't leave Harlan County. They could have moved anywhere, bought a mansion in Lexington or Nashville, lived lives of luxury. But this was home. These were their people, and the work they were doing mattered more than comfort. Maya continued attending the same elementary school, though her classmates now treated her like a celebrity. She handled the attention with remarkable grace, always quick to remind people that she'd just been lucky, that the real hero was Samuel Whitaker, who'd believed someone good would find his treasure. She spent her afternoons and weekends at the museum, giving tours to visiting school groups. She'd lead children through the exhibits, telling Samuel's story with the passion of someone who'd lived it. She'd show them the coins that were worth millions, the documents that had shaped history, the jewelry that had adorned women in different centuries, but most importantly, she'd show them the journals. "This is my favorite part," she'd say, opening a display case to reveal Samuel's final journal entry. He wrote this when he was 85 years old, probably scared, probably sad. He'd just been threatened by his own nephew. He could have given up, could have just let Marcus take everything. But instead, he decided to believe in something. He believed that somewhere out there, someday, someone good would find what he'd hidden, someone who needed it, someone who'd use it right. The children would lean in, captivated. Maya would continue. "And you know what? He was right, because I found it. And I wasn't special or smart or brave. I was just a kid who wanted to help her grandma. But that was enough." That's what Samuel meant by pure of heart. He didn't mean perfect. He meant caring about the right things. She'd pause, looking at each child. So if you remember anything from today, remember this. You don't have to be rich or powerful or famous to change the world. You just have to be curious and brave and care about helping people. Because those are the things that actually matter. More than one teacher left those tours in tears. Parents wrote letters to the foundation saying their children had been inspired by Maya's story, that they'd started asking how they could help others, that they'd stopped caring so much about having the newest toys and started caring more about kindness. The story spread beyond Kentucky. Maya was invited to speak at schools across the country. A children's book was written about her discovery, with all proceeds going to the foundation. A documentary filmmaker spent 6 months in Harlan County capturing the transformation of a town that had been dying and was now thriving because an 8-year-old girl had crawled through a broken window. But through it all, Maya remained remarkably unchanged. She still did her homework at the kitchen table. She still helped her grandmother cook dinner. She still played with her friends and got in trouble for talking too much in class. She was still just Maya, the girl who'd loved exploring and had gotten lucky. 2 years after the discovery, on a quiet autumn afternoon, Maya stood in the root cellar that was now a climate-controlled vault. She came here sometimes when the museum was closed, just to remember. The crates and trunks were still there, now carefully organized and catalogued. Each item had been photographed, authenticated, and appraised. The final valuation had come in at $233 million, even more than Samuel's estimate. But standing there among the treasures, Maya didn't think about the money. She thought about Samuel, an old man who'd spent his life collecting beautiful things because beauty and history mattered to him. She thought about him sitting alone in his log house, writing in his journal by candlelight, making the decision to hide everything rather than let it be destroyed by greed. She thought about his last words, "Do not let darkness claim what was built in light." "I didn't let it," Maya whispered to the empty vault. "I promise I didn't let it." Upstairs, she found her grandmother giving a tour to a family from Ohio. The parents looked tired, their clothes worn but clean. Their 2 children, a boy about 6 and a girl about 10, gazed around with wide eyes. Ruth was showing them the exhibit on Civil War coins when she noticed Maya. "And here's our co-founder," Ruth said with a warm smile. "Maya, would you like to tell our guests about the Double Eagle collection?" But Maya noticed something about the family. The way the mother kept checking price tags in the gift shop, then putting items back. The way the father's shoes were held together with duct tape. The way the children whispered to each other, "We can't ask for anything, remember. Mom said we're just looking." Maya knew that look. She'd worn it herself not so long ago. The look of people who'd come to see something beautiful because beauty was free, but who couldn't afford to take any of it home. She approached the family with a smile. "I'm Maya. Want to know a secret?" The children nodded eagerly. Maya knelt down to their level. "The most valuable thing in this whole museum isn't any of the coins or jewels. It's the idea behind them. Samuel Whitaker believed that when you have something precious, your job is to protect it and share it with people who will appreciate it. So he hid all of this and waited for someone to find it who would do exactly that." She stood and gestured around the museum. "This place exists because Samuel believed in helping people, and because my Nana and I decided to use what we found to help others, just like people helped us." She pulled a card from her pocket, one of the foundation's information cards. "If your family ever needs help, any kind of help, you call this number. That's what the foundation is for. That's what all of this is really about." The mother's eyes filled with tears. The father looked away, jaw clenched with emotion. The little girl tugged on Maya's sleeve. "Are you like a princess?" she asked. "Because you found a treasure and now you help people?" Maya laughed. "No, I'm not a princess. I'm just someone who got lucky and decided to share the luck." She squeezed the girl's hand. "And someday, when you find your own treasure, whatever it is, you'll share it too. That's how this works. That's how we make the world better." As the family left, Ruth put her arm around Maya's shoulders. "You're going to change so many lives, sweetheart. You already have." "We both have," Maya corrected, "and we're not done yet." She was right. Over the next 5 years, the foundation grew exponentially. The museum became one of Kentucky's top tourist attractions, bringing millions in revenue to Harlan County. Hotels opened, restaurants thrived. The town that had been slowly dying suddenly had a reason to live again. The foundation expanded beyond emergency aid. It built a community center with free after-school programs. It funded job training initiatives. It partnered with hospitals to provide free healthcare screenings. It created a scholarship fund that sent 40 students to college each year. It even bought the old cottage where Ruth and Maya had lived and converted it into transitional housing for families escaping domestic violence. Maya grew from a curious 8-year-old into a thoughtful 13-year-old, then a confident 18-year-old preparing for college. She'd been accepted to every school she applied to, with full scholarships offered by all of them. But she chose the University of Kentucky, close enough to come home on weekends to help at the museum. She planned to study history and non-profit management, with dreams of expanding the foundation model to other communities. "There are Samuel Whitakers everywhere," she explained in her college entrance essay. "People who've accumulated knowledge or resources or love and who are just waiting for someone to find it and put it to good use. My life's work is going to be connecting those treasures with the people who need them most." The essay earned her a personal call from the university's president, praising her vision and maturity. But to Maya, it wasn't vision or maturity. It was just obvious. When you've been saved by generosity, you spend the rest of your life trying to pass it on. On the 10th anniversary of the discovery, the museum held a special celebration. Dignitaries came from across the state. The governor gave a speech praising the Fletcher family's philanthropy. Documentary crews filmed every moment, but the highlight came when they unveiled a new wing of the museum, dedicated entirely to telling the stories of families the foundation had helped. Photographs lined the walls, smiling faces of people who'd received medical care, education, housing, hope. Each photo had a caption telling their story. The single mother who'd received an emergency grant to fix her car so she could get to work, who was now a nurse practitioner. The veteran who'd received help paying for his PTSD treatment, who now ran a support group for other veterans. The teenager who'd received a scholarship, who was now in medical school. Dozens of stories, dozens of lives changed. At the center of the wing was a mirror with words etched across the top. "You are part of this story." Below it, a plaque explained, "Every person who visits this museum, who supports this foundation, who believes in helping others, you are continuing Samuel Whitaker's legacy. You are proving that generosity echoes through time. You are the treasure." Maya stood in front of that mirror during the celebration, looking at her reflection. She was 18 now, ready to leave for college in a few weeks. She barely recognized the girl she'd been 10 years ago, small and scared and desperate to help her grandmother. But in her eyes, she could still see that same determination, that same curiosity, that same belief that the world could be better if people just tried. Ruth came to stand beside her, their reflections side by side. Her grandmother was 72 now, her hair fully silver, but her eyes were bright and her smile was genuine. The worry lines had faded. The trembling hands were steady. She looked, finally, like a woman at peace. "Are you proud?" Ruth asked softly. Maya thought about it. "I'm grateful," she finally said. "Proud feels too much like I did something special. But grateful, that feels right. grateful that I was curious enough to explore, grateful that Samuel hid his treasure instead of letting Marcus destroy it, grateful that good people stepped up to help us, grateful that we got to turn something scary into something beautiful. Ruth hugged her granddaughter tight. Samuel would be so proud of you, of us, of all of this. I think he knew, Maya said. I think that's why he waited. He knew that whoever found it would feel the weight of the gift, would understand the responsibility. He knew we'd do right by it. As the celebration continued around them, Maya walked outside to the front porch of the log house. The sun was setting over the Kentucky hills, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The parking lot was full of cars, families leaving after a day of learning and wonder. Children ran across the grass, parents called them back. Life happened all around the old house that had once stood empty and silent. She sat on the porch steps, the same spot where Samuel must have sat 100 times, watching the world from his chosen solitude. She understood him better now, understood the desire to protect something precious, to believe in a better future even when the present was hard. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8, broke away from her family and ran up to Maya. "Are you the girl?" she asked, breathless with excitement. "The one who found everything?" Maya smiled. "I'm one of the girls who found something. But people are finding things every day. Maybe you'll find something too." "What should I look for?" the girl asked. Maya thought carefully before answering. "Look for places everyone else ignores. Look for the forgotten things, the quiet things, the things that don't seem important but might be. And most of all, look for ways to help people. Because that's the real treasure. Not gold or jewels or money. The real treasure is being able to make someone's life better." The girl's mother called her back. As she ran off, she turned and waved. Maya waved back, then stood and walked into the museum. She had a tour starting in 10 minutes, a group of 4th graders from a school in Louisville. She'd tell them about Samuel, about curiosity and courage, about the power of believing in something better. And maybe, just maybe, one of those children would remember, would grow up and find their own hidden treasure, whatever form it took, would choose generosity over greed, community over selfishness, hope over despair, would prove, as Maya had, that the world was still full of people pure of heart. Anyone can change the world if they're curious enough to explore, brave enough to act, and generous enough to share what they find with those who need it most. As the sun set completely behind the hills and the last visitors left for the day, Maya stood in the museum, surrounded by $230 million worth of history. But what she saw wasn't the value of objects. What she saw was the value of belief. Samuel's belief in goodness, her grandmother's belief in her, the town's belief that they deserved better, and her own belief that one person, even a small one, could make a difference. The girl who'd crawled through a broken window seeking shelter from a storm had become the woman who'd opened a door for thousands of others seeking shelter from poverty, despair, and hopelessness. She wasn't special. She was just someone who'd been given a chance and had chosen to pass it on. And in a small town in Kentucky, in a log house that had stood silent for decades, that choice echoed like a promise kept, like a fortune shared, like hope made real. Some say courage is loud, but they're wrong. Courage is an 8-year-old girl squeezing through a window when everyone told her to stay away. Courage is believing the world can be better even when you have every reason to give up. Courage is standing in front of powerful men and saying, "This isn't yours. It belongs to everyone who needs it." And sometimes, when you're brave enough to show that courage, you don't just find a treasure, you become one. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click to keep discovering what happens when ordinary people do extraordinary things. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe that sometimes the smallest among us carry the biggest hearts and change the world one brave choice at a time.